Hello, humans. Welcome to The Frontline, a leadership and business podcast brought to you by Peregrine Corporate Services, an Isle of Man-based fiduciary provider. My name is Martin Hall, and thanks for listening. In this podcast, we chat to an array of business leaders from different sectors to learn more about them, their market, skill sets and knowledge. We hope you enjoy. Today we're joined by David. Thanks for your time today, David.
Pleasure. Nice to be here.
Perhaps provide our listeners a bit of background to yourself, where you grew up on the island.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I'm a Manxman. I don't know whether we're in the majority or the minority, but it doesn't really matter. But yes, born here back in the 70s. I had the pleasure of going to some beautiful schools on the Isle of Man: Ballaquayle, Murray's Road, Ballacameen. Bit of a hard knock life school that. And ultimately left the island to study at the University of Central Lancashire afterwards.
What were you studying there?
In terms of in University of Central Lancashire, it was business and finance, which was aptly named a BA in business enterprise because I made the jump from a HND to a degree in a year. So right. they had to think of a name and they came up with BA Enterprise, which is...
And what made you decide to go down that route of business studies?
From an early age, I liked business. It might sound quite strange. I had part-time jobs in the likes of Marks and Spencer's, where you saw cash, you saw people buying, you saw commerce. So to me, there was a natural interest to being involved with something that actually was productive, as opposed to my family at the time. I had a hotel in the island. Hospitality was great. It was hard work. But I got more drawn into the commercial side of the world, which was with business, and that's where I ended up sort of focusing my time.
I suppose, and ultimately the hotel's business at the end of the day, isn't it? So you're in that environment really from a young age.
Yeah, I suppose it was the sort of my grandmother's apron string, so to speak. But I think, one of the things about hospitality is it literally is 24/7. I'm not saying business isn't 24/7, but ultimately for me, that was 5 a.m. starts and 2 a.m. finishes, and sort of thought I'd go for more civilized hours.
So you finished uni and then what was it, into the employment world?
Yeah, I finished uni and was very lucky to get a place on the British University's North American Club, which was a co-sponsored exchange between America and the United Kingdom. So I spent nearly 6 months in the US after I finished my degree, working in Trimper's Fun Fair in Ocean City, which was great fun. And then spent a couple of months traveling around the US. And my auntie Jackie was working at Royal Bank of Canada at the time on Athol Street. So when I came back, I got invited down to go and help them out with just general office sort of work.
Did you always think you'd come back to the island when you were at uni and then went over to the States?
I wasn't 100% sure. But obviously when you're that age, your early 20s, you run out of money. The default option is get back into the nest and spend some time recouping. So very fortunate that Jackie worked for a really good company called the Royal Bank of Canada. At the time, they were switching MDs. A fantastic gentleman called Rolly Olden came to the Isle of Man to be the MD of Royal Bank of Canada. And whilst doing my temporary part-time job there, I got offered a graduate trainee position. So that's where my career started, really, in the Royal Bank of Canada on Athol Street in the Isle of Man.
And then did you start doing studying early as well then? What I call it, evening college types of or university stuff, or was it more just on the job learning at that stage in your career?
I did. I think Rowley, bless him, tried to get me to sit the Association of Chartered Institute of Bankers exams. I've got to be honest, I don't think they were my particular forte. So I think when I went, I did one of the law ones up in the college. It was okay. But more aptly for me afterwards, I did the marketing one, which I found really interesting again on how to position financial services, which are intangible. But I was only on the island for a little bit of time before I got transferred down to their Jersey office. And I think that's my career started as a graduate trainee, but when I got transferred to their Jersey office, that's when I really got an insight into the investment world, because my mentor is a gentleman called Andrew Buchanan. He headed the investment team in Jersey. Andrew's had jobs, all over the planet, Hong Kong, the Channel Islands. He was up in the Isle of Man with various companies. I was fortunate to meet him, and then 97 was pretty much me being invited into the investment team at Royal Bank of Canada. Big team, billions of dollars under management, massive group. And then I started doing the what was called the London Stock Exchange papers, which have now evolved into the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment. And hence why today, I'm a level 7 chartered wealth manager, which is pretty much as far as you can go with with the City Institute, but it started back then.
Yeah, right.
Started. Not as much as in earnest as it should have done.
And one of the, you mentioned there about Andrew and a mentor. One of the things that comes up a lot with conversations with people is about mentors in their career. That it's maybe not something you, certainly when you're younger, actively go looking for, but I think it's always good when sort of us older folks can look back at people we've kind of looked up to and helped us. And I guess younger listeners to this, it's always good to look around and see if you can find those mentors, and whether it's then an actual conversation with them to say, can you help me? Or whether it's just a mentor from a distance by visually watching what they do and their behaviour and stuff like that. But it seems such an important part of your career development.
Without a shadow of a doubt, whether you do it digitally, you can pick up mentors digitally now, in terms of, people you aspire to be, because, social media has made, the top CEOs of the planet a lot more accessible. A good mentor can knock 5 to 10 years off your career development just by being there to guide you and show you how that, you learn from those people. They've made a lot of mistakes in their career. And when they're mentoring you, by the nature of the mentoring, you actually miss a lot of the mistakes they make, because there's no need to repeat mistakes. They've learned from them. So it can actually take loads of time off your career development and ultimately fast track you to where you want to go.
And that movement then, you've spent some time in Jersey. How long were you down there for?
Yeah, I've done 2 stints in Jersey. The first one with Royal Bank was just over 3 years. And I moved from Royal Bank to a company called Standard Bank, who are a great company based here on the Isle of Man. I moved into their stockbroking and asset management division. And then when I finished a position in the Caribbean, I was invited back by Standard Bank, and I did another year down in Jersey. So I think in total 4 or 5 years. In a great island, great place, a lot of energy.
And what brought you back to the island?
In 2013, I basically was very keen to come back to the Isle of Man after spending quite a bit of time away, and an opportunity arose on the island to set up a brand new investment management company, which I'm sure we'll go into a bit later on. So what attracted me home? Love being here. As you know, love being out on the bike at the weekends. And ultimately, a lot of my family are here. They're getting on now. And ultimately as well, from my side, it was not a business opportunity, a career opportunity to set up a greenfield, business, brand new investment company. And that was the real driver for me coming back.
Yeah. So maybe expand on that a bit. So that's WH Ireland and that.
Yeah, the previous team was WH Ireland, and we set up WH Ireland Isle of Man Limited, which was the international arm of the business, UK listed entity, credible name, and ultimately, for me, it was a case of, wow, we're bringing a new name to the Isle of Man. We're going to employ new people on the Isle of Man. We're going to put the Isle of Man on the map, because a lot of my previous relationships were in the Caribbean. They were in South Africa. Even ones down the Channel Islands. Very quickly, WH Isle of Man had clients in Gibraltar, Malta, South Africa, the Caribbean. And it really was good to bring a new bit of energy and a new name to the island, just to show the island's growing.
And was that, looking back, was that a daunting task starting from? I'd set up an office for Close Brothers in Barbados back in 2008, so it wasn't as daunting as it should have been. But I think, like any new business venture, there's risk. You're going to be a bit scared, because there is risk. If you're not scared about taking some risk, there's potentially, it's not as big a risk as what you think it is. But taking risk is part of business. It's part of growing. It's part of, you should never look to completely avoid risk. You've got to take some risk to grow and develop and stretch outside your boundaries. So on that side, massive, for me, had a very comfy career, had, very comfortable lifestyle. And to go back to literally square one, where you open the door of a business without a single client, not one single client. I don't think there's many people in their career who've done that. But I actually enjoy it. I like building. And we did a very, very good job at getting the business up to a very, very sort of, credible size in a short period of time. I'm sure if we had a conversation, it could last days around the biggest challenges of doing that. But if you had to kind of give one or two kind of points to say these are the biggest challenges in doing that, what would they be?
The biggest challenges are awareness. We are Manxmen. There is a little bit of a raised eye when a new name pops up on the street. It takes a bit of time for people to be comfortable with a new name and a new offering. I'd say that was one of the challenges, is that if a new name is put into a particular jurisdiction, there's a lot of work got to go into. Doesn't matter whether it's David Bushe or any of my colleagues, a lot of work's got to go into, reassuring clients that you are safe, that you are secure, that you are credible, and that you're offering a really good service. And ultimately, in our world, it's all about, performance and service. I think the other side of it was educating a non-island board about island life, and how suddenly, things don't happen in a week. They might take 2 months instead of a week. Mm-hmm. There is a bit of a cadence difference between London and the Isle of Man. That's why we all live here, basically. But in business, you've got a new name, you've got a new island, you've got to convince various stakeholders that it's the right thing to do. And it just takes time. That's the most difficult part. We knew we had the right product. We knew we had the right people.
In an earlier podcast, we talked to Capital International about culture across jurisdictions and how important it is, and it kind of can get easily forgotten when, in those situations where you're doing that, it's not about educating them, is it? But it's about things are done at different paces, at different ways, and therefore you need some appreciation. That certainly if you've got a parent elsewhere.
But without a shadow of a doubt, you've got a London parent and an Isle of Man business. There's going to be differences, and likewise today, we've now got a Guernsey-based parent and an Isle of Man business. Luckily for us, as we've seen from the air bridge and all the work with the government and our corridor, I don't think Guernsey and the Isle of Man are that different. I think there's quite some big nuances between Isle of Man and Jersey. But I think we're getting to know that our neighbours in Guernsey are actually very similar in the way they think, the way they want to do business, the way they want to grow, and potentially lots, not just the new name comes to the Isle of Man, which is Ravenscroft, lots of synergy there because there are like-minded people on these islands. And I've been a big fan for decades of, it shouldn't really be Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man going out to the world to sell international financial services in highly robust, regulated, risk-averse jurisdictions. It should be the Crown dependencies going out. And to me, that makes sense. We've got basically nearly 300,000 people who could all be advocates for what we do.
Yeah, it's power in numbers, isn't it? Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned Ravenscroft there. Talk through about how that opportunity came about and how it's gone. Because I know I suppose ultimately still in the early phases of that.
I think this is fresher than fresh, really, isn't it? It's, so the actual transaction completed back in August 24th. So we're talking six weeks. What a go. How did Ravenscroft come about? Well, I think in terms of the Isle of Man team, really hard-working bunch. You can't look back and say that building a business from scratch to over 350 million of assets and money was anything other than a good job. But with a UK parent that had a slightly different culture, had a different focus in their business. They were a stereotypical sort of, stockbroker. They had a corporate finance division, which were all successful in their own right. And I think they just got themselves caught up in, change, and change takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of money. And ultimately we had this Isle of Man office, which was we want to grow, we want to be exciting, we want to develop. So between ourselves and our London colleagues, the decision was made that it would be better if the Isle of Man business was part of another business. Lucky for us, Ravenscroft were interested in an Isle of Man presence. John Ravenscroft was an ex-Isle of Man resident. He knows the Isle of Man. He likes the Isle of Man. And ultimately, they want to grow their business. And it's very much a Crown dependency-based business. They're very much into island life, the community. So it was like a meeting of minds together, whereby our culture from the Isle of Man team's point of view and their culture was very similar. And one thing sort of led to another, as they say in the world. And, we ended up being bought by Ravenscroft, which is, fantastic for the Isle of Man PLC. It's a new name for the asset management industry. Again, to be associated with a new name. And the passion behind the team in Ravenscroft about their new Isle of Man office and the team in the Isle of Man is contagious. They just want to grow. They want to develop.
So when you're now looking at, I suppose, investment philosophy from WH Ireland to now Ravenscroft today, how does that pitch, or more importantly, where do you pitch now?
Yeah, well, luckily for the Isle of Man team, we've always had an international client base. So our investment philosophy and process, the DNA was the group and the group's research capability and a lot of people get surprised by this, with the Isle of Man's DNA and research capability. We've got very bright people in the Isle of Man office. They're more than capable of looking at global macro, individual stocks and collectives. And we research an awful lot, and we love what we do, because ultimately sitting with clients, then you're not only in the engine room, you're explaining and articulating what you do, why you do it. And if anything in the world goes awry, like we've seen this year, we've got a team that can quite happily do presentations and talk about it. When we had our initial meetings with Ravenscroft, there is a fundamental sort of difference between Ravenscroft and the old house, in that Ravenscroft are less geographically focused and more thematically focused. So when you hear of, how well tech's doing, Ravenscroft are very much into the tech industry. If you hear about healthcare and being important in today's world as we all get older, they're very keen on that thematic. ESG, which is environmental, social, governance-based funds, they're very much into that. So we've got a style whereby we had the themes within our portfolios because of our macro analysis of the markets, whereas they specifically held out their camp. We're interested in urbanization, we're interested in eco. So when we put the two houses together, for the first time in my career as an investment chap, you've actually got people in the room saying the same thing, saying we want to invest in themes, we want to invest for growth. Why should we overly focus on the United Kingdom, for example, if most of the growth companies are based in America, Europe, Asia, emerging markets, which Ravenscroft are very keen on as well. From our point of view, our new chief investment officer, Kevin Bushe is very well heeled. He's been around the block. He's on CNBC regularly. And when we sat with him, we literally got a chance to swap our notes with his notes and the rest of the Ravenscroft team, who are all our colleagues. And it was so refreshing to see that there's a joining of minds there. So there's no big clash of the titans. It's very much, let's get on business as usual. Let's invest to make money for our clients in the right risk-adjusted fashion, which is pretty much what we're all about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned one of the investments in there, which I did want to chat about actually, which is ESG, which is, I think, correct me wrong, I think economics, sustainability and governance, I think is the acronym. That seems to be, in our industry, in the trust company, we speak to investment houses, and that's very high on the agenda at the moment. For being part of the investment philosophy, and certainly a message, I think, coming from a number of clients. Do you think that's, I guess, as we try and get greener as a world, that's obviously naturally going to be becoming more on the radar, but just particularly more recently, do you think that's particularly because of COVID and people standing back and going, or do you just think it's just a natural progression of the desire to be more green? It just seems to be higher on radars more recently.
It is, and I might surprise you with my answer on this one. I think a lot of it's getting driven by legislation such as the UK Corporate Governance Code, the UN 6 Principles. I think there's a lot of boardroom pressure for this, and the boardroom pressure is changing behaviours, where basically companies are actually sitting there saying, we don't want to be involved with the slave trade, we don't want to be involved with child abuse, we don't want to be involved with a material manufacturer that's just dumped a load of pollution into a river. So I think there's a lot of legislation that's being put into place that boardrooms have to manage and be seen to manage. You'll see a lot of companies that are listed will have sustainability reports now. We as asset managers are obviously, we've always been socially responsible in our investing. And a lot of listed companies used to do it as a sort of, a demonstration to their stakeholders that they were caring about the planet. But I think in the last 5 to 10 years, it's really become mainstream. And ultimately, from our point of view, it's good to see there's external bodies now like Arabesque, sustainability, that actually score companies on their environmental impact, their social impact, their governance impact. So we as investors now can actually get scores on these companies from independent bodies that says, okay, Glaxo's got a good score, or Mondi's got a good score, or Nestle's got a good score. So I think it's a combination, but the asset management world is, I don't think this is like an investment that's a flash in the pan. This is literally investing in companies which have got the environment at the front and left lobe, sort of sitting there saying, we've got to demonstrate to our shareholders and our stakeholders, both primary and secondary. And you could say, a group of 320-year-olds on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram can be as powerful as a group of shareholders in absolutely, taking a brand to task or a CEO to task. Yeah. So I'd say there's been a mind shift on it, but I think your comment there has the COVID situation enhanced people's awareness because we've seen blue skies, we've seen planes not flying, we've seen less pollution. Definitely has been an element of that, without a shadow of a doubt.
Interesting insight, very interesting. So on a personal level, I know recently you've done and sat the Institute of Directors outside of how did you find sitting exams. How was that experience? What made you decide to do that, to do those exams? And
it was more so that, you know, as you get older in business, you and I were talking earlier about stuck in your ways, you know, you get in your comfort bubble, and ultimately you do things because that's the way you've done things. About 2 years ago, I had two big objectives on my agenda. One was the London Marathon, and then straight after the London Marathon, it was, what can I do for my brain now as opposed to physical stuff? And I'd been told about the Institute of Directors by several people, one of our ex-close colleagues, Carolyn Gelling, and you know how much you actually learn and pick up just by going into them sort of environments. So it was a qualification that I wanted to have because it demonstrates you are capable of sitting on a board. And for anybody who's on a board that hasn't got that IOD qualification or something similar, I'd strongly suggest you look at it, because for me, the intellectual sort of development's been huge across many disciplines: finance, strategy, leadership, you know, the role of the board and the director. Just understanding the fundamentals behind risk, you know, the legislation, teams. It's just a real one-stop shop to get you, you know, right back where you should be, thinking about being a director and offering value strategically as opposed to being, you know, more of a manager. A lot of directors find themselves in manager positions, whereby you're an executive director, but you're not a manager. There's a big difference, and just helping set those boundaries and say, well, you know, how do we, you know, improve the Isle of Man? How do we improve the sectors? You know, you don't do that by being at the coalface 24/7.
It's interesting because having set up two businesses from the ground up, you can easily, you know, as an observer, you can look as an observer of it, you're well equipped, and what more do you need? Not that we can't all learn every day, but that self-awareness for to go and achieve those things that you want to do, which is continue to improve.
And I think another aspect of it was, now this is as equally important. What a great bunch of people who I've never ever seen, spoken to, or met before. You know, in all four of my modules for the certificate, I met completely new people. Some courses were on Isle of Man, some courses were in Manchester. I've met people from, unfortunately for you and me, I met the guy from Everton Football Club. We would have liked it to be in Liverpool. And met one of the chaps from Tottenham Football Club. So, you know, the broad range of companies that I got exposure to: environmental companies, cleaning companies, football clubs. And then on the Isle of Man, typically it's in financial services, but there was people there from Heron and Brealey, there was people there from Zedra, there was people there from Clearwater. So you just get to meet such a broad range of people, which once again, it takes you away from boardroom groupthink with the people you know, to actually listening to people about things that they do that are similar problems, but approached in completely different ways.
Yeah, just giving you a broad.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And again, the Institute of Directors come up in a few podcasts recently about that benefit of networking within that. So when we talk about networking, and that's obviously something you're very good at, and certainly from my experience when we cross paths, what would you, again, if you had advice for listeners on your approach to network, and what advice would you give to?
I think advice number one, it's not selling. Yeah. It's definitely not selling. You can tell, you know, when somebody's in a room with a you know, a sort of like selling sort of mode on. In terms of networking, it's getting to know people, it's getting to understand people. And there's going to be many, many people that you actually meet whereby there may be absolutely zero commercial opportunity or interest, but there's still people that you should know and you should spend time with because of what you learn from those people and from different sides. And, you know, networking with people with similar interests, networking with people with very, very dissimilar interests is equally important. But, you know, what we all are partly guilty of is that, and I say to my team in the Isle of Man all the time, when you go into your desk and you sit down there and start working, there'll probably be very, very few people sitting at their desk thinking about you. So if you haven't spent that time, you know, articulating to people where you can add value and help them in their lives, they'll never pick up the phone. Yeah. So network's an essential part of that. And it works both ways because, you know, we are not constantly as a team on the hunt for people to give us business all the time. You know, we have clients who need, you know, maybe fiduciary services, maybe lending services, you know, maybe even like, you know, we get clients coming over, where's the best garage on the Isle of Man, etc. So you just got to think of networking as 6 degrees of separation. You're going to hit people, you know, very, very quickly. It's building your brand, your business's brand, so that when there are opportunities that are mutually beneficial, they're done for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons, because you know people.
It's interesting because that often the natural instinct is when you meet someone, I can't, I've got no direct work with you, your instincts to kind of to switch off and not listen and move elsewhere. But it's a very important point that about you just don't know where that connection might eventually lead to both ways, whether it's you help them, they help you, or you help a client down the road because, like you say, you happen to be chatting to a garage mechanic that you knew that then the client's having a problem and you can just point them in that right direction. That brings you value for you and your business. Yeah. So, again, as someone who set up sort of business from the ground up, and now in this new environment as well, when you look at business and sort of your mindset into business generally, obviously a positive person. I know you from just knowing you. That is that an important part of that mindset, and what other things do you think are key to? I think, and self-awareness, something I'm sort of observing here and chatting before we came on air, was that self-awareness of, I need to improve, I need to get better, the business needs to improve, and goal setting, that type of thing. It's
really important in that, from when you walk in a room, whether you've just recently relocated into a new business or you've set up a new business, or you're in a long-term business, you walk into a room with the most important asset the business has right in that room. You need to get to know people. You need to get to know what their aspirations are. Some people will want to go to the top. Some people will want to be quite happy in whatever role they do, which is equally valuable to the company. And other people, you sort of like sit there and say it takes lots of people to make a business. You need different personalities, you need different skill sets, you need different levels of people. In terms of, my sort of mindset is that from whenever I've done business, whether it was, and it only happened postgraduate trainee where you start getting involved with different parts of a business, there's got to be a really strong strategic plan. And that strategic plan is built on the cultures and the vision of the business. What is the business there to do? Why is it there? Where's it going to go? And then the next sort of line of command is that, what are the board doing in that business? Because it's going to be them that energize the management team and the people in the business to be a happy company, to be a loving company, to be a caring company, to be a hard-working company. And then that falls into that strategy and the plan, whereby, you can have the best strategy and plan, but if you've got nobody in the room buying into it, you're not going to get very far, are you? The canoe's not going to go down the river. So from my point of view, it's a case of when you employ people in the company, make sure, if you can, they've got similar values and visions. Make sure that the personalities fit in with the people in the room. You have got to move away from people all sitting around the table as best friends, having a pint, saying this is the way we want to go because we all agree. That sort of group think, and you don't get new ideas and that sort of basis. So after the strategy and the plan, it really is the other parts of, to quote them, the IOD. You start building in the leadership, you start building in, the people side of the business, and the finances. You'd like to think are, they're pretty much there for the growth of the business. And I suppose there's a whole book to write on this. How do you do it? Just go in with a good plan, get good people around you, make sure that what you offer the clients the right thing. There's a lot of people who are in business that, ordinarily, they might not actually understand what the end user thinks about what it's doing. Make sure what you do is right. In the asset management industry, we live in a cruel world that every 12 weeks we send a report to somebody that says whether you're good, bad or indifferent. They've got the perfect excuse to pick up the phone and say, right, I want to have a chat with you. And hopefully it's always on the right foot because, this quarter, the UK market's had a terrible time again. It's down about 5.5%. I've just looked at all our performance yesterday, and a lot of our clients are 2% up because we've got that thematic type investing. We do go global as opposed to UK, so that ties into the business. Give the client what they want. Make sure what you say on the tin is what you actually do. Make sure the team will buy into that. Make sure you have a happy, productive culture where people can buy in, show their enthusiasm, give ideas, criticize things that aren't working right. And just build a good, solid sort of momentum there that people want to be part of. Success attracts success.
Really, really good advice. So the future for David in work and outside of work, what does what's on the horizon?
I think in terms of, going back to, I think what we talked about here, I think one of the things I've always had to contend with is change. whether it be jurisdiction, whether it be company.
I get the impression you thrive on that as well, though.
I do like change. When it's time to change.
Yeah.
A lot of people might think that
doesn't sound right for a Manxman. That
no,
we don't like change. Those Manxies.
So we're going to quote the Jewin and his friend on the clip. We don't like change, but if you're not changing, you can change within your current role. You don't have to change role. You don't have to change business. The business needs to change. So for me, it's that things change. Don't get upset that if things don't go your way, because part of change is trying different ideas. And part of change is risk and taking some risk to add excitement to the business or your life. But the future, I've got to say that since the deal completed with Ravenscroft, we recently had Stephen Lansdowne on the Isle of Man. He's, ex-founder, founder of Hargreaves Lansdowne. Stephen was up with his wife Maggie. John Ravenscroft was up with his wife Jackie. Mark Boosfield was up with the other guys. And one of the things I'd say about the future is we've now got ourselves in a camp, in a business that is actively energized, actively interested. The Ravenscroft business has a capital market side and a private client side. Now, most people won't know that the capital market side has some professional investor funds, which are as that for professional investors that own things like Fortan, own Vicarage House, own First Names. They've got a shareholding in Sandpiper, which is a Channel Island retail business, which is opening up that Apple store on the Isle of Man in the near future. They're the ones that raised the money for Card Factory. So subliminally in the Isle of Man, it wasn't hard for us to buy into, what is Ravenscroft. They're an active business. They want to grow. On the private client side in the future, we've got an ad campaign on most of the radio stations now. We've got, media coverage whereby what do Ravens want to do? They want to offer investments to everybody on the Isle of Man. And whether that's you starting out in your career, whether that's you basically mid-career, or unfortunately like me, late career, offering investment solutions which are jargon-free, aren't, just nonsense, are literally what they say on the tin. So my future folds into that. If I get to walk away from the industry and however long it is, you and I were talking earlier, I'm a passionate Manxman. I think the asset management industry in the Isle of Man could be a lot bigger. It could have a lot more people in. We should be attracting a lot more of the youth to the industry because it's exciting. It is fast speed. It's constantly changing. So my future would be probably to dedicate the next decade of my life of continue to build Isle of Man PLC, to continue to build the asset management industry on the Isle of Man, which I'm very passionate about. And ultimately, off the back of that, continue to build myself because, yes, I've done some ticking the boxes in terms of, like I said before, running and then basically doing the IOD. I've still got one more IOD bit to do, which is the diploma. The wind willing, the last paper I sat will be done. In terms of the certificate, diploma is the last bit, and then that's sat in November over here. And hopefully after that, do I go for chartered director status? I don't know. Does that then open up the door to a lot of, well, not a lot, some select non-exec positions? Or my future is about if I can offer value and I can help people and I can be part of a board, or, the one thing we are going to do is grow Ravenscroft, and that's without a shadow of a doubt. With the momentum of John Ravenscroft, Mark Bousfield, Kevin Bushe, Steve Lansdowne, the team here on the Isle of Man. We've got a great team on the Isle of Man. Going to be growing the Isle of Man, and the future for me would be good plan, good people, good customer in terms of experience. And all guns just aiming for going forward and growing.
And people that want to reach out to yourself?
For me, it's a case of, there's my LinkedIn profile, there's my Ravenscroft email, which anybody can get from our website.
I'll have some links in the show notes as well.
Well, that's brilliant. If you've got the links there, and in terms of, it's not me that makes Ravenscroft, it's the team on the Isle of Man. We've got fantastic people. We've got a young chap, Lee Branston, we took on 4 years ago. I've mentored him up to portfolio manager status now. We've got a fantastic chap, Chris Bell, who's another of our senior team portfolio manager. So there's the whole team there that are there to look after clients. But from my point of view, I say it's we're here because the plan's been right. It's been executed right. We've moved house pretty seamlessly. Because that was right too. And I think, credit to the Isle of Man government for managing COVID so well. For you guys with the Manx Foundation Fund, getting resources behind people. I think we're very fortuitous on the Isle of Man. We've got some great people, some great brains, some great foresight, and companies like Ravenscroft wouldn't be able to thrive if the island wasn't the right place to thrive.
No, I agree. And I guess you'd be more than happy if people wanted to contact you as well and for a coffee chat to you. And again, we go back to that mentor and that willingness. And again, a lot of people I'd like to think come on the podcast because they just want to share their experience and knowledge, that if people want to reach out to you to talk about that, you're more than happy to grab a coffee.
Absolutely. As long as somebody doesn't try to talk to me going up Ingerbreck or out of Ramsey, out of Ramsey on the Sportive. So people don't try and do that when I'm going up a 16% hill, which is a hard job for me. And even today it's a hard job. Martin, absolutely delighted. If there's younger generations that want to get into asset management, I think, how do I do it? If there's people in the industry that want to know more about asset management, it's been a very, the industry, but in past years has been sort of like very sort of guarded and what it does and how it does it. No, we write all the time. People want to come and talk, find out about the industry, or have a chat about the IOD, talk about Jersey, Barbados. I did a stint in Johannesburg. If there's anybody who wants to go down that neck of the woods, I'm happy to have a coffee, and if I can share something that helps somebody, absolutely delighted to do it.
Great. Well, thanks for coming in. Really insightful, very inspiring. I feel like I need to go and do more than I do listening to yourself. So no, I appreciate your time, David. Much appreciated.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No, pleasure. Thanks for listening, everyone.